It was a night unlike any other in the small, forgotten village of Raven Hollow. The moon hung low and red, bleeding its light over the crooked rooftops and the endless fields of dead grass. Inside a creaking wooden cabin at the edge of the forest, a woman screamed in agony as she gave birth. But her screams weren't the only sound that filled the night. Wolves howled from the mountains, dogs barked madly, and then silence. When the baby finally came into the world, the candles blew out on their own, plunging the room into total darkness. And in that moment, everyone swore they heard a faint whisper, a voice that didn't belong to anyone in that room. The midwife, an old woman with trembling hands, took one look at the newborn and gasped. The baby's eyes were entirely black, not dark brown, but bottomless black, like 2 drops of ink floating in milk. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and he didn't cry. Not even a whimper, just silence. The mother tried to hold him, her hands shaking, but as soon as his skin touched hers, she felt an icy chill crawl up her arms. The midwife whispered a prayer under her breath, but even she could feel something wrong, something ancient, staring back at them from inside that tiny body. By the next morning, rumors spread like wildfire through the village. The child was cursed, they said, a demon born under the blood moon. The priest of Raven Hollow came to see the boy himself, clutching his cross so tightly that his knuckles turned white. But when he looked into the baby's eyes, his face drained of color. He stepped back slowly and muttered, "This is no child. This is a mark of the damned." No one dared to speak after that. Even the wind seemed afraid to blow near that house. Strange things began to happen soon after. The livestock refused to eat. The village well turned murky, and its water tasted faintly of iron, or perhaps blood. At night, people heard cries of babies echoing from the woods, though no child was missing. Doors would creak open on their own. Shadows moved across walls with no one to cast them. Every path led back to the same place, the cabin where the cursed child lay, awake, always awake. The mother stopped sleeping. She swore she could hear her baby whispering at night, though his lips never moved. Sometimes she would wake up to find him sitting upright in his cradle, staring at the window as if something was calling to him from outside. Other nights she would find small handprints, muddy, wet, and too large to belong to a child, on the walls. She began to wonder if the curse hadn't just touched her son, but her entire soul. Weeks passed, and Raven Hollow grew quieter than death itself. People no longer spoke aloud after sunset, and the church bell, once a sign of comfort, now rang only for funerals. The cursed child had become the village's unspoken fear. No one dared to visit the cabin anymore, not even the priest. But strange footprints began appearing outside people's doors. Small, barefoot prints, soaked in mud, always facing toward the forest. They appeared at night, and by morning they were gone. One night, old Farmer Garrick, half drunk, decided to follow the prints. He took his lantern and vanished into the trees. At dawn, only his lantern returned, lying at the edge of the woods, flickering weakly, coated in blood. After that night, the villagers sealed their doors with iron crosses and salt. But the whispers continued, soft, childlike voices echoing through the wind, calling names, sometimes laughing. The mother, now pale and broken, claimed her son never slept anymore. She said his eyes glowed faintly in the dark, like embers hidden under ash. One evening, when she tried to sing him to sleep, the lullaby stopped in her throat, because she realized he was humming it back, perfectly, in a voice too deep, too knowing for a child. That was the first time she fainted, and the last time she ever dared to sing again. By the child's 3rd month, animals began disappearing. Chickens, goats, even dogs. Gone overnight, leaving only trails of blood leading toward the woods. The smell of rot hung thick in the air. Some claimed to see lights in the forest. Not lanterns, but flickering orbs of red, floating between the trees. When a brave few went searching, they returned trembling, saying they'd heard a baby crying among the branches, and behind it, footsteps too large to belong to any human. From that night on, the villagers started leaving offerings. Bread, milk, even coins, outside the cursed cabin, hoping to appease whatever was inside. The priest could no longer ignore it. One stormy evening, he gathered 3 men and approached the cabin. The air felt heavy, thick with decay. They opened the door, and the smell of death rushed out to meet them. The cradle was empty, rocking slowly on its own. On the wall, written in what looked like dried blood, were 4 words. "He walks among you now." Suddenly, one of the men screamed. The priest turned and saw him staring at the window, where a small figure stood outside, watching them. Lightning flashed, and for a brief second, they saw its face. The priest dropped his cross. It was the child, but older, and smiling. That night marked the beginning of the village's end. Fires broke out without cause. People vanished in their sleep. The church itself burned to the ground, and the priest's charred body was found clutching his melted cross. No one dared to stay after that. Families fled into the mountains, abandoning their homes to the fog. Only the cabin remained, untouched, standing silently as if mocking them. And on certain nights, when the moon turned red once more, those who dared to look from afar swore they could see a small figure standing at the edge of the woods, humming softly, waiting to be reborn. Years passed, and the name Raven Hollow faded from maps. The forest grew wild, swallowing what remained of the homes and roads. Yet travelers sometimes spoke of strange sounds at night, faint lullabies carried on the wind, and lights that moved through the mist like fireflies. A wandering merchant once claimed he had seen a boy standing on the ruins of the church, barefoot, humming to himself. When the merchant called out, the boy turned slowly. His eyes were black, just like the old legends said. The merchant fled in terror, but by the time he reached the next village, his hair had turned completely white, and his voice was gone forever. Decades later, a new settlement was built nearby, called Ashmere, as people were unaware of the land's dark history. For years, the village thrived, until one night, when the moon turned red again. Livestock began to vanish, wells soured. Children whispered to unseen friends. The local doctor, curious and skeptical, dismissed the talk of curses. But after his infant daughter fell ill with no explanation, her eyes turning black as pitch, he changed. He became obsessed, searching every record he could find about Raven Hollow. The deeper he looked, the more the same name appeared, the child of the Red Moon. One stormy night, driven by desperation, the doctor rode through the woods toward the ruins of Raven Hollow. Lightning illuminated the trees like twisted skeletons. When he reached the old church, he found the ground cracked open, and from the cracks, a faint humming rose, like a lullaby sung by the earth itself. He stepped closer and saw something move beneath the soil, a small, pale hand pressing upward. Before he could react, the hand grabbed his wrist with impossible strength. The humming grew louder, turning into words. "Father," it whispered, though the doctor had never been a father to that voice. The doctor returned the next morning, or what was left of him did. His horse dragged his lifeless body to the village gates, his eyes wide open, mouth twisted in silent terror. Clutched in his cold hand was a scrap of parchment covered in symbols and one final line written in blood. "The child has no end, only beginnings." The villagers buried him quickly, afraid to even speak his name. That night, the doctor's house burned to ashes. From the flames, some swore they heard the cry of a baby, not in pain, but in laughter. As the years crawled on, the curse of the Red Moon became legend once more. Parents warned their children never to wander the woods when the sky turned crimson. But every generation, when the blood moon rose, a child was born who never cried, who stared into the world with eyes too dark, too knowing. They called them the Touched Ones. No one knew if they were blessed or damned. But somewhere, deep in the ruins of Raven Hollow, a voice still sings, soft, patient, eternal, waiting for the next moon to bleed again. As Thomas passed the small threshold from infancy toward toddlerhood, the unease in Raven Hollow curdled into a constant, sour presence. People no longer crossed the lane after dusk. Lanterns were snuffed early and curtains drawn tight as if to seal out a smell they could not name. Thomas himself changed slowly, not by leaps but by small, terrible increments. A stare that lingered too long, a smile that did not quite match the shape of his mouth, a patience in his gaze that felt practiced rather than born. Livestock in nearby barns grew skittish and refused to eat when he passed. Hens stopped laying and dogs would crouch, ears flat, refusing even a summons. Once a flock of starlings darkened the sky and then fell mid-flight, as if the air itself betrayed them. His mother, Eliza, spent nights holding him to her chest until her arms shook and her prayers ran out of words. She would whisper to him, bargaining like someone bargaining with a storm, insisting that he was hers and he must be human, and sometimes, only sometimes, his tiny fingers would curl and she would feel for a breath of ordinary warmth. But that warmth never lasted. In its place came a cold that crept up her forearm and settled under her skin. A hollow chill that left her feeling watched not by the boy alone but by what watched through him. Word of the boy's nature reached Father Brennan, the village priest, who had shepherded Ravenhollow through drought and plague and who had never before admitted fear. He arrived with a Bible fat with use and a lantern whose glass trembled in his hand. Crossing the threshold felt wrong. The air inside the hut pressed against him like a hand. As he began the prayer and splashed holy water, the little room answered in kind. The child's wail split into layered notes, an impossible chorus like several throats sharing one chest. Father Brennan felt his rosary burn hot against his palm and, when he glanced down, saw faint scorched patterns like a tiny handprint branded into his skin. He stumbled back, his voice cracking as he shouted to God for mercy. The boy's eyes, however, were steady, black wells that reflected not the priest but an expanse of moving dark beyond, as if the hut opened onto a long corridor of night. Father Brennan left that night a different man. Hollowed, shaking, certain he had touched something older than sin. By dawn, the bell he had clutched was gone from his belt, and in its place were small imprints on the floorboards. Prints shaped like a child's hand but too long in the fingers. As the seasons tightened, the village's social fabric began to fray. Neighbors who once shared bread now avoided one another's gazes. A single look toward the cottage could provoke a stampede of mothers sweeping their infants inside. The economy crumbled. Tradesmen refused to travel that lane, and the market dwindled. Yet superstition alone could not account for the sequence of deaths that followed. Slow collapses in the night, sudden fevers, animals found arranged like offerings, necks bared to the sky. Those who tried to intervene met strange fates. A blacksmith who forced his way into the cottage was discovered the next day, hands fused to his hammer, mouth frozen in a silent scream. A youth who stole a piece of the boy's blanket returned blind and walked until he fell into the marsh, never to move again. Every calamity tightened the noose around the family until at last the villagers, in a single grim council, decided on exile. But as Eliza and her husband packed, the child smiled, the kind of smile that measured and remembered. When they stepped beyond the last fence boards to flee into the trees at dawn, Thomas did not cry. Instead, he stood at the threshold and whispered to the wood, and the wood answered. When the couple looked back, the cottage was empty. The cradle lay undisturbed. The shutters swung wide though no wind blew. On the windowsill a wet print remained, small and round. Not a child's hand but something older. Eliza and her husband vanished into the canopy with only a locket and a few scraps of clothing. For a time it seemed exile had freed the village. The nights grew marginally lighter, birds returned in grudging bands, and old routines resumed. But the reprieve was brittle. The land remembers. It is patient. After a handful of years, travelers and shepherds reported strange lullabies borne on winds that had never been sung here before. They told of a small shadow that paused at crossroads and of footprints that led to nowhere. In the wider county, a pattern emerged that scholars later would piece together. Births under the red moon, infants with eyes too black, sudden flights of health followed by slow, inexplicable deaths in households connected to them. Names changed, families moved, churches rededicated, but the pattern repeated, like a sentence rewritten by a cruel hand. And far below this repeating circuit, deeper than roots and bones, something waited, patient, learning, cataloging the breadth of every life that crossed its boundary. The last record most villagers kept was of a night when the blood moon rose low and vast, and every dog in the county began to howl in uneven, discordant chorus. Those who stayed witnessed small phenomena they could not forget. Milk that curdled as if in the presence of a knife, roses loosened petals as if in pain, and an old stone cross behind the church cracked down its center. They said the forest itself leaned inward to listen. People left offerings again, primitive and trembling. Some nailed iron to doors, some strewed salt on thresholds, but rituals were brittle comforts. The child, the story said, did not die, nor was he ever fully born to a single life. He became a kind of tide, appearing where the world was thin, slipping between households, drawing in names with a soft, terrible insistence. And sometimes, on nights when the wind turned just so, you could stand at the lane's edge and hear it. A lullaby carrying from the treeline, patient as hunger, sweet as rot. The song of a child who keeps being born and whose birth always costs the village something it will never get back. They say the cries stopped when the red moon faded, but the silence that followed was worse. The fields grew cold again, and the wind carried a lullaby that no one dared to finish. Some nights, when the fog crawls over the hills, you can still hear it, soft, patient, calling a name that no one remembers anymore. And maybe it's calling yours next.